out of 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. And so what we are doing over the next 100 days is to showcase legislation I would support as governor that is already being worked on in the state legislature, legislation I would oppose, legislation that I would propose as governor. And in that case, when I'm proposing policies and legislation, I am personally writing those pieces of legislation and bills myself. And so that is the impetus today. On Saturday, I released my first proposal called the Aggravated Voyeurism Act. Through my personal experiences over the last 2 years, through working with victims of sexual assault and also victims of voyeurism, I have found striking gaps in state law that don't protect children who are underage, that don't protect victims of sexual assault, that don't protect the disabled. And when you have someone who's filmed in that manner, who's disabled, a child, or being assaulted, there should be additional provisions in state law protecting those individuals. Filming a rape, for example, under state law in South Carolina is basically the cost of a speeding ticket. It is up to $500 on first offense and a misdemeanor. So the first bill I proposed last weekend was related to major gaps that I see in state law based on personal experience and working with victims alike for the last 2 years. The second announcement I made yesterday was supporting already existing legislation in the state legislature, 2 bills, S-154, Senate Bill 154, and then Jeff Bradley's bill in the House. We have been working as a state on reforming and sunsetting regulations for almost a decade. Since I was in the State House 7 years ago, this was already being worked on. And I look at and inspired by President Donald Trump. In his first term as president, he put forth an executive order that would remove and sunset 2 regulations for every one that was generated under federal law. When he was president, they actually sunset between 6 and 8 regulations for every one. So they far exceeded his executive order. Now, in his second term in office, President Trump has put forth an executive order that would sunset 10 regulations for every new one created by the federal government. Obviously, South Carolina's government is significantly smaller than the federal government. So a 2-for-1 sunsetting bill that has been sitting in Senate Judiciary for almost 8 years is something the state needs to champion. This was a bill that was voted on by every single Democrat, every single Republican, and allows us to grow the economy. It helps small businesses, and small businesses are the backbone of South Carolina's economy. So for example, you need to register to hang wallpaper in South Carolina. Up until recently, it used to be $200, but if the job is $500, you have to go through an entire registration process with the state of South Carolina just to hang a piece of wallpaper. So there are many regulations we can look at in state government that can be repealed and would grow businesses. So today, one of the biggest issues for voters statewide is illegal immigration. Just a year ago, almost to the day, I passed a bill called the Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. It's one of the first 12 bills in the House Rules package of the 119th Congress in January of last year. It is part of an executive order signed by President Trump. So I have a long history of working on issues, not just that are important to the federal government at the national level, but also at the state level. And I was inspired by, when I wrote that bill and filed it, one of the things I was inspired by was the sanctuary sheriff that we had here in South Carolina. Now, we all know several years ago, the state legislature banned sanctuary cities, sanctuary towns, sanctuary counties, that it is illegal to be a sanctuary political jurisdiction according to the definition in state law. Now, even though this law exists, there are no teeth behind it. There really is no enforcement mechanism. And in fact, if you look at state law and you look at the reporting by law enforcement, every single political jurisdiction has been in compliance with state law, even though we have banned sanctuary cities and sanctuary counties. So what this proposal that I'm doing today, and it's called the South Carolina Immigration Enforcement Act, would actually put teeth and penalties and prosecution behind anyone who is a sanctuary sheriff or sanctuary jail administrator, that sort of thing, would put those penalties behind it, so that when we have a sanctuary sheriff in South Carolina, which we have had, that individual can be removed from office. So when Sanctuary Sheriff Kristen Graziano, let me step back, in 2024, in about August of 2024, I received information from a whistleblower at an agency who had information about illegal aliens who were being released, who Sanctuary Sheriff Kristen Graziano was not following detainer requests and was letting out illegals who were rapists, who were murderers, and who were pedophiles. And we're not talking about one or two or a dozen or 2 dozen. We are talking about many, at least 100 or more over her first 3 years in office. And so what I learned is that the governor was basically powerless to remove her from office. Now, because I advocated for her removal from office, Charleston County and the voters by about 1.5 points fired her from office. It was not easy to do, and we got a sheriff into Charleston County who worked with ICE on day one. But there should be a mechanism with teeth that allows the governor to remove a sanctuary sheriff, because I want to make sure when I'm governor that it never happens again in the state of South Carolina. So what the bill does, the South Carolina Immigration Enforcement Act, puts teeth behind it. So it would require jails to honor ICE detainer requests, and it would require jails to notify ICE 48 hours ahead of time before releasing an illegal alien or detainee. It would create a misdemeanor offense for those who knowingly refuse to comply. That would be punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine. It would trigger an automatic removal from office upon conviction. It would impose civil penalties of up to $25,000 a day for non-compliant jurisdictions, which are already defined in state law. And it would cut off local government fund appropriations for 3 years to jurisdictions who violate the law. It would also allow any citizen of South Carolina to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. Now, one of the things that I have learned over the years, since I was a state lawmaker and now as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, is that there's a lot of undercutting going on with businesses, where businesses will hire illegals and then they'll drive down wages to try to compete with legal businesses, with legal citizens working, and they have nowhere to go and they have nowhere to report. So a citizen would be able to file a complaint if this was happening, laws were being broken, illegals were being let out who had detainer requests, they'd be able to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. Now, one thing I want to make very clear is that this bill, this proposal, is modeled after Texas legislation that Governor Greg Abbott signed into law, I believe in about 2017, and it has stood up in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2018. So it has been tested constitutionally. It follows South Carolina's Constitution. It follows South Carolina statute and modifies it in a way that is held up in federal court in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. There is anti-commandeering doctrine in it that has held that the federal government can't compel states to do something or follow federal law, but this is state law compelling state jurisdictions to comply. So it's different in that way. For any Fourth Amendment concerns, some courts have found that holding individuals solely on an ICE detainer, which is an administrative request, not judicial warrant, may violate Fourth Amendment. So this bill addresses that concern by including any exceptions. If they have legal citizenship, they have legally the right to be here, they don't have to be detained. So that provision is in there. Due process and removal from office, any concerns we got with that, the bill's removal provision is grounded in existing South Carolina constitutional and statutory state authority. And it's under the misconduct under South Carolina Code 8-1-80 and provides for a removal upon conviction. So there are due process protections there. Regarding the First Amendment, we're not criticizing someone's free speech. This is about voting or advocacy or speech, so we avoid those concerns. This is about state law. There is indemnification. Some concerns by some sheriffs have been, well, what if we get sued? And there is an indemnification or liability shield for those who are following the law protections, so there's no excuse for that. I've studied what Texas has done. I've studied what other states have done, what is held up in court, and that's what this proposal is about. I led the effort to oust a sanctuary sheriff here in South Carolina, and I want to make sure that South Carolina voters know that it will never happen again on my watch if I'm governor. And this is going to be one of many proposals you will see from me on cost of living, affordability, illegal immigration, law and order, crime, roads and bridges, you name it. I'm going to have a bill or a policy for it. And with that, I'm more than happy to take questions.
Do you have a sponsor lined up for this show?
I don't. I haven't shared it. I spent the Christmas break working and drafting this. I just drafted this recently and I'm putting it out for the first time. I would like to find sponsors and do that, particularly for these bills. I mean, the proposals I'm putting out, they're easy, they're common sense. I hope someone from the legislature will pick it up. This is easy stuff. It's been tried other places. If we can do it, if Texas can do it, we can do it here in South Carolina.
Congresswoman, this is just one bill you're talking about. You're hoping to get some movement on it. But when we look at sheriffs in general, outside of just immigration issues, are you concerned, especially with some high-profile corruption cases in the past of sheriffs across the state, that maybe there needs to be more oversight for sheriffs in general?
Well, I'm concerned about the broken justice system. I mean, I am a product of that system. I turned evidence over of a crime and nobody's been arrested. I just had a victim in my office, unrelated to my stuff, who was a victim of sexual assault, who had a recording of it, who's had a rape kit tested, and she can't get any information about it. And no one's been arrested. So you look at the Scott Spivey case. In the Scott Spivey case, this guy was chased 9 miles down the road, shot in the back and killed. And there's no trial of the shooter. To me, and you've got individuals at the local level that are being investigated. You had the case of Logan Federico right here in Columbia, assassinated, this young woman assassinated, and you have an attorney general that may have just screwed up her family's chances of getting the death penalty in that case because he got ahead of his skis and potentially tainted the jury pool in that case. And you got a solicitor that at the time wouldn't tell the Logan Federico family whether or not he would pursue the death penalty. A guy who had, 29 felony convictions or arrests. He had a huge rap sheet. You got magistrates that aren't qualified per se. They don't have a Juris Doctorate. You have judges that are letting out violent offenders. It's not just Charlotte with that Ukrainian girl. I mean, there's case after case, and I'm overwhelmed. I FOIA'd the Attorney General's office recently, and we're going to do something about this relatively soon, but not a single pedophile in the state of South Carolina was prosecuted by a court trial last year. And I've already shown you guys the data where we had 93 cases of pedophilia in one county in South Carolina over a 3-year period, where 93% of those charges or cases were dropped of pedophiles. I mean, South Carolina is a haven for pedophilia because you don't prosecute these things, and then when they do get sentenced, they're sentenced to very little. So I look at the entire system as being broken. I am a product of that system, and unfortunately, coming forward, I thought that, hey, the right thing will happen. Well, the right thing hasn't happened. And so I have a lot of victims, including the Spivey family, this young woman yesterday, man, woman, and child. I talked to so many people who come into my office and who need help because they're desperate for justice because they can't get it in our state of South Carolina. We have one of the worst domestic violence rates in the country. We have one of the worst rates for crime with illegal firearms. I helped Berkeley County get a $500,000 grant to hire 3 officers to combat the violent crimes with illegal firearms. We got a case in one county just last year. The guy abducted his girlfriend, beat her face in, kidnapped her, beat her face in. 2 years later, the solicitor hadn't prosecuted it. He murdered her on Mother's Day last year. And so these are serious issues that require serious policy, but also I'm not a product of politics or wealth. I'm from Goose Creek. I grew up here. I'm from South Carolina, and I've lived these challenges that South Carolinians are living. And that's why you see I'm so passionate about this. But the entire system is broken. And I'm going to be putting forth very simple legislation. So one of the proposals I'm putting forward, I agree with a lot of the magistrate legislation that's being proposed, but I think there's a simpler way to do it. And so you're going to see me kind of combine 1, 2, 3 different bills and say, this is the way that I would do it. This is the kind of bill that I would want to sign into law that simplifies the process, because sometimes, people want to put in everything in the kitchen sink. They want to throw everything in, and it can never pass. And so sometimes we have to look at less is more. Small parts make a big difference. And you're going to see me take some of the ideas that are sitting in the legislature, and then what would I do as governor with those? What would my advice be? And you're talking to someone, 2 of my opponents have never written a bill. They've never passed legislation. They don't know how it works. But I am well versed in this. The policies I'm putting forward, I have personally drafted, I've personally written. I know the system well, I know state law well, I know the Constitution well, and that's what you're going to see from me. Nothing but policy and bills and legislation, things that I would do in my first 100 days as governor is what you're going to see over the next 100 days. Nothing but policy. It's going to be a lot.
So speaking of what's in the legislature, this is obviously different than what's already in there currently.
Yeah.
There's been existing legislation with leadership right now where they're essentially trying to get sheriffs to mandate their agreements with ICE. There's been similar proposals to this one, lacking criminal penalties from people like Representative Beach that didn't get a hearing. Just curious if you feel like those fall short, and how you're hoping that maybe shift that conversation as a candidate in this session.
Well, in this particular bill, this has been proven in federal court. So I want to put forth policies that can be implemented constitutionally, statutorily, legally, etc. So this might go beyond some of those proposals. I support requiring 287G participation. Those jurisdictions are reimbursed by the federal government to do that. And so there have been great proposals. This has got more teeth behind it. There are financial penalties. So when Charleston County Sheriff was letting out illegals, and everybody knew this was going on, I'm the only candidate for governor when we had a sanctuary sheriff who said anything and did anything to get her ousted from office. Everybody else was silent. They were afraid to come forward. I came forward with a couple of local lawmakers in the state house, etc., and we got her unelected from office. And the voters in Charleston County did that because of the information that we brought forward. So this is something that has more teeth than what's been previously put out there. When Sanctuary Sheriff Kristen Graziano was caught doing this, there were no financial penalties. Like the threat of losing your funding from the local government fund should be threat enough. So I've got a couple pieces in here that Texas has done, but it's negotiable too. So, I'm negotiable on everything, but this is a model that has been proven in federal court that we can do here.
Representative Mace, could you name the other sheriffs in the state that you classify as sanctuary sheriffs?
Kristen Graziano was the first one that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any others that have been egregious as hers, or I would have spoken about it already. I just want to make sure that it never happens again. And what we're going to see in the midterms, particularly concerning, is that the House is probably going to be taken over by the woke left, by people that want illegals here committing crimes and they're okay with it. So I want to make sure that the state of South Carolina has every binding authority, statutorily through state law, to protect our citizens here. Never again can we have a sanctuary sheriff not fulfilling these detainer requests, letting out illegals who are murderers, rapists, and pedophiles. That was happening on the streets of South Carolina, and I am saying never again.
And could you just talk for a moment on, you say Kristen Graziano let out illegals from Charleston County Jail. Is that your interpretation based on she didn't hold them? But because
She was
judge said-
ignoring
judge said
ICE.
call.
She was ignoring ICE detainer requests and was not notifying them when she had illegals. And she was blaming it on a judge's order, which is not a thing. She was lying to the press about it and to the public. That's why she got caught. And it's why voters unelected her in 24.
So if a judge releases an illegal alien
Judges don't have the authority to do that.
in setting bond, I mean,
Yeah, well, so
would
this
the
would,
sheriff be held accountable for that action?
well, in this particular statute that I'm proposing, a sheriff who does not notify ICE 48 hours before an illegal is released would not be in compliance with state law. They would be breaking state law, which is a criminal offense under this proposal.
Bond is set within 24 hours.
Doesn't matter. 48 hours. That's what this law would do. And you can see the provisions and where I put it in state law.
You gonna weigh in on the state Supreme Court race at all? Are you following that at all?
I'm not, we can get
We're
you
a
an
long
answer.
away from that. So
Yeah, I did get asked today about coercive control. There's a bill that's going through about coercive control regarding domestic violence. That's a bill that I support. And I'm very much looking forward to the state legislature firing back up on the 13th of January and seeing what their priorities are. Yesterday, I did put out a statement supporting Governor McMaster on the $1.1 billion in infrastructure funding in his state budget. One of the things that the state is very good at is scaring the bejesus out of you to say the state has no money and we're going to run a deficit this year. But then because of the growth that we're having right now, South Carolina, according to some figures, is between the first and the fourth fastest growing state in the country. And so by population. And so with that, we have an abundance of revenue coming in, which is why my plan, which I'm going to roll out the legislative side of how to implement my plan. I've already written that bill and we'll get to it in a couple days. My plan to get our taxes down to zero, the state income tax down to zero in 5 years or less. It could be done faster, but the beauty of my bill is when you freeze the general fund at the 2023-2024 figure, I mean, we're going to come in the general fund this year at almost $15 billion, $14.7 billion. So there's room to do $1 billion in infrastructure funding, and there's room to do almost a $2 billion permanent tax cut to the taxpayers of South Carolina. So because of the growth that we're having, we have an abundance of revenue that we can easily fill some potholes and give people their money back. And I think the brilliance of the idea that I have is that it does that in a staged, stable, responsible manner with extra revenue that the state doesn't necessarily need. We can give back to the people. So I have already written that legislation. I will be revealing that as well. But we have the ability to do that. But one of the things that on infrastructure that I will do as governor is be very aggressive on federal resources. So I probably out of anybody in Congress have gotten more for infrastructure, $400 million over the last 2 years alone. Just for my small congressional district, we have 7 congressional districts. So I will have a very aggressive office of federal grants. We were just very, very aggressively going after raised grants, federal funding for stormwater, infrastructure, bridges, roads, everything you can think of, because I have experience in doing that. I know where the money is. I have the team assembled to do that, and we'll be very aggressive. So I applaud Governor McMaster for doing that. I mean, in some places, particularly along the coast, if you need to replace a bridge or build one, it's going to cost you $1 billion. If you need to do an interchange like 526 and I-26 3 years ago, that was $1.1 billion just for that interchange. So imagine what's happened in the last 3 years with the cost of roads and bridges. And as you all know, we have some of the worst rural roads in America. So I'll be proposing a dashboard for potholes. Like there's all sorts of things you'll see me proposing over the next 100 days for transparency, accountability, and where those dollars are going, how they're being spent, and how it's going to improve the lives of everyday, hardworking South Carolinians.
Speaking of that, I know that you previously advocated to audit SCDOT.
Mm-hmm.
They already have a third-party auditor in office. They underwent an audit.
There have been some criticisms of the audit, the ability to maybe manipulate the outcome in that audit. So I want to have an extra set of eyes on where the money's going. And of course, I'm looking at it, and I have a hard time understanding where they're getting their data from that would prioritize, for example, widening 26 from Orangeburg when you have one of the biggest ports in the country and roads need to be widened there. So, looking at traffic counts. So I would want to make sure that we're prioritizing the highest traffic areas. Look at Greenville, South Carolina, and the growth we've had there, the amount of infrastructure that's needed in Greenville. You got folks in Myrtle Beach that are complaining, but I'm looking at the highest growth areas of South Carolina. You're looking at Greenville, Spartanburg, and you're looking at Charleston. So those are the two places we really need to focus when we're talking about widening roads because of the traffic counts, because of the amount of growth in those places. Greenville might be the fastest growing metropolitan area. It's basically now a suburb of both Charlotte and Atlanta. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the prices of real estate in Greenville, but it's expensive to live in Greenville now.
Speaking of the criticisms of the audit, what are they specifically?
That they can, that it's not as transparent as it could be, the internal audit. I would like to see a third party come in and take a look at it, a second set of eyes.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Sean from Watchdog 57 from Columbia. Sheriffs in the Midlands are pretty unanimous on both sides of the aisle there. They criticize the catch and release, problems with bond being set and just being released right away. Do you have any plans for bond reform in the state?
I haven't yet addressed that. I can take a look at that, but I haven't yet taken a look at bond reform. I am concerned in other states about cashless bonds starting to be a thing, and I don't think that will ever happen here, but certainly making provisions where we don't do away with bond, and that in some cases we might want to increase some of the bond minimums. I mean, one of the things I'm looking at in our criminal statutes are some of the minimums, like the bare minimums, and they're almost kind of a joke, whether it's the financial penalty or the amount of time. When you have a pedophile that only serves 1 day in jail for having 1,900 images of kids as young as 3 being assaulted by animals, and you get 1 day in jail, and that's allowed, you have a serious problem with bond and with sentencing. One of the things I am proposing that eventually gets us there is a requirement to do a statewide report. I wrote this bill recently also, and I'll release it soon, but that would require one report. I mean, SLED does a very good job about every year in their annual report about telling you what crimes have been committed by jurisdiction and by county, and then there's a separate report by a different agency that in a very limited way shows you some of the sentencing or charges, who's in, who's out of jail, but you really can't comprehend the data. So one of the things I will be proposing that in order to, I think before we change bond and some of these criminal statutes, we have to understand where the problems are. And one of the things that our state is very good at with judges and lawyers is that they plead everything down. And so I want a statewide comprehensive report by jurisdiction, by county, by municipality, by judge, by solicitor, and the attorney general that would show not just the criminals who've been arrested and the crimes they've committed, but I want in a comprehensive report, I then want the data to show who pled down and how much and what the sentencing averages were, because I think it's very important. Even when you have an attorney general that doesn't prosecute a single pedophile in court last year, not one, and you have these cases where 93% of pedophile cases are dropped in one county, or pedophiles getting 1 day in jail, or people who are committing felony after felony of violent crime getting out and murdering Logan Federico or somebody else. We have a real problem. And so in order to face the problem, we have to admit there's a problem, and you admit there's a problem when you see the data. So that is one of the proposals you'll see from me in the days ahead. I already drafted it on how we get a comprehensive report from one agency. The data already exists. We have the data. They just don't want to give it to you in a manner that's readable by the press or by the people. It's very convoluted, very disorganized, and my proposal will fix that.
Congressman, just wrapping up, you know how hard it is to get a bill passed here
100%.
and in Congress, and especially as the governor, you really have limited powers. If you were to be governor, how would you be able to use your power, your limited power, to get your legislation passed? What would your approach be?
I would work with the legislature. I mean, I would work with them on drafting bills. We'd have weekly meetings on what we're working on to implement this agenda, finding what the challenges are. I would be very involved. I'm very hands-on. I don't even have a chief of staff. Like we have, like in my offices and in every race I've run, I have a very flat organization, and I like to be involved legislatively with policy, but also use the bully pulpit. but in a way that is constructive, not in a way that is detrimental to what's happening. As you saw yesterday, I called out Senate Judiciary, and I think people will get excited about what I'm proposing, and the pressure from the bully pulpit that I have, but also the people of South Carolina, educating them on what's going on and what's not happening, I think could be very exciting. And we've seen the ability of people to come together and really get things done. The child luring bill, the government master signed into law, was that a year or two ago, that Lee Hewitt had championed. I worked with him in the state legislature. That took 5 years, which is a miracle in this state. But it was due to pressure from the people of South Carolina that knew how ridiculous it was, that it wasn't kidnapping or against law to offer the kid candy and entice them to the car until you shut the car door. There was no luring provision that then local law enforcement and police could arrest the person for attempting to kidnap the kid. And so it took 5 years. I mean, that to me is a very short period of time. And so you'll see that kind of effort and engagement and passion. I'm very passionate about these issues. I've been successful. I've worked on legislation that's been signed into law. And so I want to bring that same energy right here to the state legislature. All right, thank you so much. Follow up with Piper afterwards. We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Does anybody need this? Because I stole this.